Rob Feckner, the president of the CalPERS Board of Administration, and I'd like to welcome you to Sacramento, not just the capital of California, but also the allergy capital of the West Coast, hence the water. So if I need it, here we are. I'd like to start off by thanking the teams from both CalPERS and CalSTRS for all their hard work in organizing today's event. I think we can all agree we've had a great day so far, and what an inspiring event it's been. We've heard and looked at diversity and inclusion from many angles through today's sessions and gained some very valuable insights, starting with the fact that there's a clear business case that can be made for diversity and inclusion, and that we all have a stake in it, whether it's to help the bottom line, improve the performance of our employees, or elevating the quality of the service that we provide to the people that we all serve. We need the best and the brightest in our organizations working together to innovate and solve problems. And today, we've learned what it takes to foster a workplace culture that will not only recruit talent, but help to retain it as well. We've also looked at our role as investors to advance diversity and inclusion practices with the companies in which we invest. So as we close out today with our final session, I want to thank you once again for being here and participating in these important discussions to help advance diversity and inclusion practices in both of our organizations. Now that brings me to our keynote speaker session, with Sheehan leading a discussion with John Thompson of Microsoft. For those of you that don't know, Sheehan is the Director of Corporate Governance for CalSTRS. She is responsible for overseeing all their corporate governance activities, including proxy voting, company engagements, and managing over $4 billion placed with activist managers and sustainability managers. Prior to her work at CalSTRS, Ann served as Chief Deputy Director of Policy at the California Department of Finance, and she's also served on the CalPERS board as a representative for the State Personnel Board. It was at that time that I had the pleasure to be able to work with Ann while she served on our board. In addition, Ann has served 2 terms as the chair of the Council of the Institutional Investors. She's a member of the SEC Investor Advisory Committee and the NASDAQ Listing Council. She also serves on the advisory board of the Weinberg Center for Corporate Governance at the University of Delaware. Ann's experience and background make her the perfect choice to lead today's discussion with John Thompson. John is here today to help us learn how to move the needle with our diversity and inclusion practices and action plans. He is currently the chairman of the board at Microsoft, a position he accepted in 2014, and the only one that has previously been held by Bill Gates since the inception of Microsoft. John has a well-documented career in the tech industry, starting with his work at IBM, where he quickly rose to the ranks of sales, marketing, and software development, and ultimately led the organization as general manager of IBM Americas. Since 2009, John has been an active investor in early-stage technology companies in the Silicon Valley, where he sees a pressing need to build diverse teams in order to meet the evolving needs of the consumer marketplace. Most recently, he served as Chief Executive Officer of Virtual Instruments, which is leading the way in infrastructure performance management for analytics. In his work as the chairman of Microsoft, John played a role in recruiting the current CEO in 2014, which he credits as one of the more interesting and exciting opportunities that he's had. And he's led efforts to expand diversity within the company, resulting in a talent pool of broader ethnicities in executive positions, supply chain policies that support women and minority-owned businesses, and a steely-eyed focus on our customers' needs. Throughout his career, John has been driven by producing results, which he credits with opening new doors of opportunity and leading him to establish himself as a decisive, well-respected leader. I look forward to John's insights. Please join me in welcoming Sheehan and John Thompson.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob, for the kind introduction and for the opportunity to really have a conversation with this very special individual.
Oh, please.
As I was preparing for this, one of the articles I saw that he is nothing short of an icon in Silicon Valley, so that's quite a testament to you. So, John, tell us a little bit about your background. Rob went through your bio, but talk a little bit about your journey to the top, the mentors that you've had, and really your commitment to diversity and the jobs you've had.
Well, I grew up about as far away from here as you could possibly imagine, in West Palm Beach, Florida. My mother was a school teacher, my father was a postal worker, and so we had an affinity, if you will, within our house for somebody always having a job and candidly following through in academics. I went to a historically black college, Florida A&M University in Tallahassee. That was after I realized I didn't want to play a musical instrument all my life, and I went to school my first year on a music scholarship and realized, gee, I want to be a businessman. I wasn't quite sure what that meant for me, but as I looked around the community of West Palm Beach in the 60s, what was clear was success was defined as a teacher, a preacher, a doctor, or a lawyer, or a local businessman. And back then it was all about being a businessman. And so my interest was, how do I become a businessman? How do I become like one of the few leaders in this community that have obviously done so well? And so coming out of Florida A&M with a degree in business administration, a fraternity brother of mine who ran outplacement services suggested that I ought to interview with IBM. And I looked at him with a perfectly straight face and said, now look at me. I've got an 800-pound afro, a very large mustache and a beard. I don't wear any shoes that are a single color. They must be at least 2 colors. And all of my pants are striped and all of my shirts are flowered. I'm a hippie. I have no reason to be a part of IBM.
I'm not going to fit there.
And he says, shut up and take the interview. And as luck would have it, I had spent my last 2 years in college as a salesman, selling stereo equipment. And truly, as luck would have it, the sales manager who was interviewing me for a job at IBM was looking to buy a stereo system. And so, being the natural salesman that I am, I spent the vast majority of the time convincing him that he should not only buy a Marantz amplifier and a certain kind of turntable, but he should buy it from me in my store. Well, I got the job.
Yes.
And I got really, really lucky to have, candidly, a horrible incident about a year into my career. And that luck was this. I went on a ride with a salesman who was a year ahead of me, and that ride took me to all of these clients that he had, and he just won a new client up in Dade City, Florida. And it was a Napa auto parts distributor. And so local business, you know, buying a computer, a System 3. How many of you know what a System 3 is?
You got a few hands out there.
So he buys this, and Tom gets his first new order, and he's there to pick up the order, and he's all excited. So when we finish, the client turns to me and says, so John, tell me about yourself. So I said, well, I work for IBM. I've been there about a year. I'm a year and a half or so behind Tom. I'm hoping someday that I'll have a job just like his. I went to Florida A&M, blah, 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 blah. And he listened to all of that, and he looked at me, and he looked at Tom, and he looked at me, and he looked at Tom. He says, don't ever bring him back here again. So now we were smoking Hava Tampa cigars, celebrating the new order that Tom had got, and Tom dropped it and spilled all over him. And we went, what's wrong? So he says, well, if you notice, our store is over there, but our office is over here. Our owners don't want people like him in our office. And that was quite the moment, because back in those days, IBM had a policy which was, we won't do business with you if you won't do business with our representative. And there Tom was sitting as the representative, but I was along with him. So the question was, would IBM say no to that order? And as we got back to the office and we explained what had happened, the branch manager's question of me was, well, what should we do? And my answer was, that's not my responsibility. That's your responsibility. But I will tell you, I am not the rep. Tom is the rep. So why would you penalize Tom for something that is not relevant in the sake of this conversation? I said, so if I were you, while I understand the policy of the company, you should be thoughtful about the application of that. I said, more importantly, though, I'm going to have to feed my family calling on people like that. And that scares me. And the history of IBM's succession for salespeople back in that period was you would sell new accounts, then you'd sell mid-sized companies, and then you'd sell to large companies. Well, that one incident catapulted my career by 5 years because I went from a new hire sales trainee targeted to sell new accounts to sell into large enterprises, my first quota job. And I got my first mentor, a guy who was an unbelievably talented and experienced executive that had retired to Tampa to finish out his career. And he was my mentor for the next 2.5 years as I was learning to be a salesman and a professional, if you will. And that was the formative point of my career and my life. And I'll never forget it. Dick Lemon is somebody who's pretty special to me, even to this day.
So talk about how and what he did and how he inculcated into you that importance of that mentorship and how you carried that on in your career. Because we heard today from some others who talked about the importance of mentorship, the two guys from Blackstone, who really told a compelling story about it goes just beyond sort of showing up and being there to answer questions, really developing the relationship, the friendship, the personal relationship with that mentor.
Yeah, I tell people quite often that, and as you can imagine, I get asked to be a mentor quite often. And it starts with, do I know you? Because it is all about a personal relationship. It is all about an investment in time and energy in you. And if I don't know you, I don't know how I can be an effective advisor or mentor for you. And I don't know how you could do that for literally hundreds or thousands of people. And so I am personally much more selective about who I mentor and how many people I mentor. So I do have the time to share with them when they need my help. In the case of Dick Lemon, my first mentor, Dick lived in the community in Tampa, Florida. He was not at all bashful about telling me how stupid the things that I was doing were. And that candor, quite frankly, sunk in. So often people will tell you good things about what you're doing, but would not tell you what's not so good. And in Dick's case, he had it completely backwards. And every now and then I'd have to ask him, did I do something right? Because he never really focused on that.
A little positive reinforcement every so often, right?
But what it shaped for me was first a way to self-inspect the work I had done. And I could not be so careless because I knew when I showed up at Dick's desk, if it wasn't perfect, he was going to smack me around a little bit. And so it taught me the diligence of follow through and follow up and making sure that the message I was trying to communicate was clear and that it was concise and that it was something that was meaningful for whoever was on the other side. As luck would have it, there's a guy who was the founder of Akamai Technology, who at the time was running IBM's sales organization. And guess what? He became my next mentor. He promoted me to a job in Atlanta where he was the regional manager. I got promoted to another location in Boston, found another mentor, a guy by the name of Paul Palmer. And then lo and behold, I got assigned a job as to the vice chairman of the board of IBM, who ultimately became one of the most powerful mentors in my entire life. Even as I was contemplating leaving IBM on a few occasions, I would pick up the phone and call him because I knew that he would be honest and candid with me, and that's the number one issue in mentorship, openness and candor in the dialogue between you and that individual.
So you talked about mentorship, but let's talk about the culture in organizations and a culture that really breeds inclusiveness and diversity and promotes it. So tell us what you have learned through the years about how to foster that culture, because culture takes a while to change, and to really dig down underneath the biases, and we heard about this today, the biases we all have that we don't even know we have, that we want people who look like us, think like us, and it's actually better to get a diversity of opinion. So tell us a little bit about your experience in the various work environments of that culture and how you began to help, how it shaped you and how you shaped it as you moved through these organizations.
Well, obviously, I spent more time at IBM than anywhere else. 27 years, 9 months, and 13 days, to be exact.
To be exact, but who's counting?
And so it had a pretty profound effect on my life. Many of the business values and business strategies that I've lived with came from that experience at IBM. And IBM was always, certainly in the early days, because I joined in 1971, diversity and inclusion was a big issue for large companies at that point in time. And they were, in fact, a leader in many respects across the board, not just in technology, but in HR practices, in financial management. I mean, it was really, really a very powerful and solid company. And so they taught me the foundational issues of how important diversity is, how important it was to not just have people of color, but women, how important it was to not just have women, but to have a cross-section across all of the divisions or operating units of the company. And so when I got to Symantec, that was clearly one of the things that I had lived with. And so it was, how do we do something about that? The big surprise to me was just how shallow the talent pool was in Silicon Valley to be able to solve that problem. And candidly, we struggled for the 10 years that I was there as the CEO to materially or appreciably change the stats for our company. And we were, when I got there, we were about 2,300 people. When I left, we were about 23,000 people. It certainly is harder to diversify a 23,000 person organization than a 2,300 person organization. But nonetheless, if the leader is not focused on it, guess what? It won't happen. It is clearly something that has to be driven from the top. And clearly, the leader has to be not just attuned to what the issues are, but has to be open-minded enough to listen to the employees about what needs to be done or what should be done. And we are very, very fortunate these days at Microsoft to have a leader who truly is willing to listen. Listen to not just what our customers have to say, but our employees and our investors as well.
No, I think that's good. So I'm going to ask you to share with them when you told me a funny story about Jesse Jackson when you arrived at Symantec. So why don't you share with the audience the story of, I think it was the day before you started at Symantec, and Jesse Jackson had come out to Silicon Valley because, as you say, technology, similar to the financial services industry, is not as diverse, perhaps, as some other industries. Those of us in the audience and up here on the stage are working to try and affect that and change that. But share with them your story about the Reverend Jackson when you showed up in Silicon Valley.
So Reverend Jackson had his first annual Diversity and Inclusion Conference in Silicon Valley on the 12th of April, 1999. Which happened to be a Tuesday. It was a Tuesday-Wednesday conference. And on Thursday morning, I was announced as the new CEO of Symantec. And people are like, my gosh, look what Jesse did. I mean, in 48 hours.
A miracle.
It is just incredible. He's an amazing man. And so it gets announced, and the world finds out that I'm African American, duh. And everybody wants to come and talk. And so the PR team comes in and says, gee, John, the press would really like to meet with you. And I said, well, look, I'm willing to meet with the press, but only if they're willing to focus the interview on my qualifications for the job, the state of the company, the strategy that I want to execute, on and on and on. But it must not be about my ethnicity. They went, okay. So they go back and they talk to all of these reporters, and only one of them was willing to accept that as the set of parameters by which he would have a chance to chat with me. So he comes in, it's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and he goes through this long list of questions about my background and what jobs I had had and what my vision was for the company, and on and on and on and on. And then 15, 30 minutes into it, he's done. He gets up to leave, and he's standing in the doorway, and he says, "Mr. Thompson, can I ask you one final question?" I said, "Sure." And so he says, "What's it like to be the highest ranking African American in Silicon Valley?" And I looked at him, and my face grimaced. My blood pressure started to rise. Smoke started to come out of my ears. And I slammed my fist down on the desk, and I said, "I will not be a picture poster child for African Americans in Silicon Valley. I'm not here for that reason." Well, the headline in the Chronicle the next day was, "I will not be the picture poster child for African Americans." so you learn the hard way that if you're going to be effective in helping manage change, you've also got to be careful about what you say to whom. Because I clearly did not mean to signal that to the broader community of Silicon Valley or the broader tech sector. I have, though, seen the sense of how people in the Valley recognize, businesses in the Valley recognize that they have to do something about this. Now, the question is, how far can they go, how fast? And the unfortunate thing is, it doesn't seem to be making as much progress as we would like. In some respects, because the talent pool, at least on the engineering side, isn't as deep as we'd like for it to be. But by the same token, I think we also have to work a little bit harder at it. Generally speaking, when organizations find an issue that is critically important to them, they put a goal around it. Why shouldn't this be something like that? If we really truly believe in it, why shouldn't we? And it's one thing to say to the senior leaders of your team, we got to do something about this. But if it doesn't matriculate down through the organization to where everybody believes in it, guess what? It just doesn't graft on quite the way that it has to. And so the tone at the top is important, but having a set of measurements that you can judge your progress or lack thereof is critically, critically important, I think, for any endeavor that you would undertake, particularly one as important as this.
Right. Well, and as the adage goes, what gets measured gets managed. And so if you set, a target, it doesn't have to be a quota, but a target. And as we know, if you incent people as part of their compensation to strive to reach those targets, I mean, it's a multi-pronged approach, I think, for some of these. So we're going to take questions from the audience in a couple of minutes, so those of you who may be interested in asking John. So let me ask the role of the board in this, because as you know, we at STRS and our colleagues at PERS have spent a lot of time on board diversity. We're also doing more on enhanced diversity, building the pipeline. And you weren't here earlier today, but there were a couple of charts that McKinsey, who's done a lot of work on diversity, has shown that it starts out 50-50, men and women, and as it gets up to the C-suite, those numbers, unfortunately, do not stay the same. But what is the importance of the role of the board of the directors in approaching this issue and in talking about this issue, not just the board itself and who sits around the board table, but also inside the organization and the role the board can play?
Well, one of the really important issues for a board to manage is risk. And one of the important issues that falls into that category is reputational risk. And it's conceivable there are a lot of companies that could come under huge, huge scrutiny for the lack of progress that they have made, or the lack of programmatic initiatives that they have in place, or the lack of accountability that they pass down through their management ranks. And so I think it's the board's responsibility to understand, what are we doing to manage reputational risk for the company? And oh, by the way, this happens to be one of those elements that's pretty darn important to all of us. In our case at Microsoft, I have been candidly amazed at how our board has changed. We now have 3 unbelievably talented women on our board. It used to be only 2. We went through a process as one was leaving, where 2 candidates ended up being in the final 2, and we kind of went, they're both awesome. Hire them both, which we did. Because you should not have some allocated slot for an African American or a woman. That just doesn't make any sense to me. It should be all about what talent gap do you have on your board and who best serves that gap. independent of what their gender or ethnicity is. And that's kind of the way we think about the issue. It was really interesting a couple years ago, Jesse came to Seattle to speak at our annual shareholder meeting. He came to ask a question, but it was more like a speech.
A very long question, right?
A very long question. Well, if you looked at the people on the dais, there was our CFO, a female, our chairman, an African American, our CEO, an Asian, and Brad, our token white guy. And
What's
you
the
know,
question?
Jesse had to look at that and kind of go, oh my gosh. At least as this company represents itself to its shareholders at the annual meeting, it's hard not to say that they don't believe in diversity given the way the stage looks. Now, if you go a little bit deeper, it may not look quite that diverse, but nonetheless, I think what has happened is Jesse's presence at our meetings, the fact that people are watching Microsoft closely for whatever reason that is these days, has caused the team, Sasha and his entire team, to be much, much more committed to how do we improve the diversity and mix, or the inclusion, if you will, of our workforce altogether.
Yeah. So let's go back to Silicon Valley, because they do need to make progress down there. And so what role, so for us as shareholders or some of the investment managers, what more could we do? What advice do you have to some of the folks in the audience about how we could help move the needle a little bit more?
Well, I've never seen one of you at all ever bashful about asking a question about something you don't like.
Right.
And if you don't like the progress that's being made in this space, as shareholders, you should ask questions about that. What are your programs and plans? What's your expectation for progress? How do you measure your progress or lack thereof? And I think that's open game, quite frankly, for all of you as the owners of these businesses. And if you don't like the answer, then you have to figure out what's the next step.
Yeah. And one of the things we've done at STRS is gone beyond the board to the enhanced diversity, going down into the organization. What are they doing to build the pipeline? Because as we say, as the pipeline, we've seen the numbers, they don't progress as quickly as they have. And what are you doing to consciously build the pipeline in terms of getting those diverse candidates, women, people of color into those senior management positions?
Yeah, there's been an attitude in tech that I don't necessarily subscribe to, which is, oh my gosh, there just aren't enough women or African Americans or people of color that have engineering backgrounds, blah, 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 blah. Well, hell, I don't have an engineering background. And oh, by the way, 2/3 of all the jobs in those companies are not engineering jobs. And so we need to be careful that we don't let ourselves get trapped into believing that, oh, well, if I can't find enough people of color or women to fill engineering jobs, and I won't look for them in other places. But by the same token, we shouldn't address this issue by just working on the non-engineering related jobs, because that's a little out of balance as well.
Right. Well, you need both in terms
That's
of that.
correct.
So let me open it up to questions from the audience. I know we've got microphones. If anyone has got a question for John, let's see. I can't. Right here.
Hi, John.
Oh, somebody else.
I'm Teresa Taylor, and I'm on the CalPERS board. I just had a quick question. You had mentioned that there
Can we
aren't
turn
a
up the
lot
lights?
of females, people of color, with engineering degrees. You had talked
she's
about whether or not you're focusing on people outside of engineering. And my question to you is, in Silicon Valley, is there thinking around, any kind of creative thinking around getting, rather than waiting for kids coming up through school, is there any creative thinking around a journey level program or apprenticeship program for women and people of color to come in and learn that so that they can take those positions?
Yeah, good question. There are quite a few programs that have cropped up over the last few years as this issue has become more visible, if you will, at the highest levels of the organizations. And so if you were to go look at Google or Facebook or Intel, they've all got some program where they're not only measuring their progress, but they're trying to create the pipeline, if you will, the feeder system into jobs inside their companies. but we can do more. And I think at the end of the day, if we don't do more, we won't make much progress. We don't do more ourselves. One of the great, candidly, travesties that has occurred in this country is our education system stinks. And the progress that we have made, or lack of progress that we've made in the education system, particularly around math and science skills, is not good for this industry. And so we need to push on the public school administrators and state governments to do a better job of improving the math and science programs in those schools. But by the same token, companies can do things in local communities. Microsoft has a massive program that they deploy around the world that's all about engaging in the community to help kids who want to learn more about technology. It's a wonderful program, and they support multiple organizations in multiple communities around the world that do just that, want to invest in early childhood development.
Yeah, and building the pipeline, building the interest in technology,
Correct.
and for folks who want to go into that industry. So I think there was another question right here. Go ahead, sir.
John, when we were at IBM, one of the things that allowed us to trickle down, as you put it, in terms of having commitment from leadership to get more diversity was through the performance plan. Every employee had a performance plan. The metrics were built in about how many units of what you're going to sell, but also how your career needs to be improved. And it just seems to me that the metric in companies can be, you need to hire or you need to help develop a diversity person. But I don't know how much folks are enforcing those performance plans. Can you talk a little bit about a cultural trickle down?
Yeah, well, I think in the case of IBM, we would have a process that was called executive resources, and it was all about looking across the talent base that you had and trying to determine who are the candidates that are going to go to the next level and the next level and the next level after that. And one of the things that was expected for every team as they came in was that they would show a diverse slate, that there would be someone of color or women on that slate.
Yeah.
And it was expected. And if you came in and it was not there, then you had to go back and redo your slate and come back. And it only had to happen once for somebody to get the message, or for the message to permeate across the company. Something similar is going on in Microsoft. Everyone recognizes that they have to have a more diverse slate of candidates. And the expectation now is not only will the SLT have targets, but at lower levels, there's an expectation that you will step up. And the old adage, you can't manage what you don't measure, this is clearly one of those things, that you can't manage to change the diversity and inclusion dimensions of your company if you're not measuring your progress day in and day out.
Right, and it's got to be done.
By the way, the guy who asked that question was my college buddy, worked with me at IBM. I'm amazed that he's so far advanced and is working in finance as opposed to doing silly tech stuff like me.
Yeah. Thank you. Please join me in thanking John Thompson for wrapping up this. This was great. Thank you.
Thank you.